What could be better than taking courses in high school that can get you credit in college? That's exactly what happens when you take an advanced placement class. High school students in Prince George's County now have a minimum of 8 advanced placement course opportunities and oftentimes more at whatever high school they attend. The highly rigorous classes not only offer the promise of college credit if a score of 3 or higher is achieved, but the experience is an invaluable academic transition to college life itself. With the school system now paying for all AP exam fees, formerly a burden on each student, the lure of AP's college-level courses is almost irresistible. To better prepare students to succeed on the AP exams and thus increase their likelihood of earning college credit, listen to the following test experts. Since each one has had long experience in scoring the AP exams, their advice and insights on how the tests are formatted, what test-taking strategies work best, and how to successfully prepare for the tests all come from practiced professionals. The Prince George's Schools appreciates the efforts of the College Board, which helped arrange for the people you're about to meet in the 8 episodes of this series.
Hello, I am Fraser O'Leary, and I teach AP Literature and Language at Cardozo High School in Washington, D.C. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of the District of Columbia, where I teach both literature and composition. The composition class is what the language class, the college class that the AP language class prepares you for. I'm also a reader for the AP exam in literature. And this morning I'd like to share with you some thoughts about how to prepare for the AP exam and how to be successful on it. It is important for you to understand that this is a very difficult exam and that you may not take an exam that's harder than this when you get to college. Now that might scare you to begin with, but if you prepare yourself and you listen to what your teacher and the other instructors talk to you about on this exam, when you take it, you will not see anything that you haven't seen before. Why are you taking this exam? Why are you being forced to take a 3-hour exam? Let me tell you, it is really easy, if you pass the exam, for a college to understand that you are qualified in English or whatever other subject you're taking the AP exam. If you pass this exam, it is a sure indicator that you are much more knowledgeable in the subject than most incoming freshmen, and that you deserve college credit. As you all know, you can gain college credit by passing the AP exam by getting a 3, a 4, and a 5. Now, not all colleges in the United States give you that credit automatically. Some colleges ask for a 5 on the test. Some colleges a 4. Some colleges a 3. Many colleges don't give you credit for passing the AP exam. As you're applying to colleges, you need to look to their requirements for the AP exam to let you know what's going to happen when you do pass the exam. What you don't want to do before and during this exam is be intimidated. If you have done what you're supposed to have done in your class, there should be no surprises. The students who pass the exam are students who read and comprehend well and who also write well. All we ask is that you do your best. Let's talk about your preparation before the exam. The language exam is nonfiction writing. Since it is nonfiction, the author is either just describing something from a neutral standpoint or is attempting to persuade you. I know that sounds very simple, but it is a good place to start. Here's what you do to prepare to attack the language exam. Read, read, and read some more. It is imperative that you are aware of history and also of the present. You have to know what the articles that you're going to be reading on this exam are talking about in order to be able to understand them and to also write about them. After you understand what you have read, then you're ready for the second part of the challenge, writing the essay. Remember that your AP class is the equivalent of a college class. Think like that. Think like a college student would think. As an AP student, you have to challenge yourself to go the extra mile in your quest for excellence. Do not sell yourself short. A functional literary vocabulary is essential to your success on this test. Your teacher has introduced you to many literary terms over and over and over again. The importance of your being able to recognize and write about these terms cannot be underestimated. Knowledge of these terms is the key to passing the exam. Basic terms such as diction, syntax, tone, imagery, point of view, allusion, irony, and symbolism are constantly utilized by the exam makers. Remember, any test that you take, you are competing against the maker of the exam. Figures of speech such as simile, metaphor, alliteration, and personification are rhetorical devices which pop up all the time on the exam. These terms have to be part of your normal literary vocabulary if you expect to do well on the exam. The readers of the exam are always impressed by those writers who are able to utilize these devices in their own writing. That is very important, that you use the words that you use are the words that are on those literary terms, so that your diction is important to the reader of the exam. There is no quick fix to this. You have to be a dedicated scholar. Another role you need to assume, besides that of a scholar, is a time manager. You need to be able to apportion your time with the multiple choice test as well as the essay part. This takes practice. I use a small joke to explain practice. This man walks up to someone on the street in New York City and he asks the man, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And the man says, "Practice, practice, practice." That is the only way that you're going to be successful on this exam, is that you're going to see things on the exam that you already know about. Hardly anyone has ever become a success in life without practice. You want to practice so that the exam becomes familiar to you. You can do this on your own. You need to practice away from the class with a clock as your guide. Your teacher can help you evaluate your work by comparing your work with others that he or she has found at workshops or on AP Central. It's the morning, it's the day before the exam. How do you get ready for this exam? The first thing you want to make sure that you do is get a good night's sleep the night before the exam. I can't overemphasize how important it is to get a good night's sleep the night before the exam. The next thing you want to do is have a good breakfast. Make sure that you have some nourishment when you're taking this 3-hour exam. Try to talk your teacher into having breakfast for everyone the day of the exam. The third thing you want to do is bring a snack. You will have a break after you take the multiple choice test for about 10 minutes. A banana, cupcake, anything that you can get that will give you a little bit an energy boost will be helpful during that break. You want to make sure that you get to school early on the day of the exam. You don't want your teacher getting frustrated because you're not there yet. Get to school early on the day of the exam so that you can just review. There's going to be something that's going to stick in your head if you get there early that's going to help you on the exam. You want to bring extra writing tools just to make sure that you have that. Remember that when you take the exam, you can't bring any electronic devices. No dictionaries, no iPods, no phones, no other electronic devices are allowed on the site of the exam. You have to realize it's going to be a hard test, and you've got to deal with that. It's not a problem. You can achieve on this test. When you're writing your essays, do not call the author by his or her first name. The readers are not impressed if you're on a first name basis with these authors. You want to use specific quotations to emphasize your examples on the test so that you quote from the text to let the reader know that you know. You don't want to spend any time when you're writing your essay saying this is the best book I've ever read or this is the best piece of essay that I've ever read. It's not going to work with the readers. So don't waste any time doing that. And if I had my cell phone right now, I would tell you do not use any text message shorthand on the AP essays. The readers are not interested in B/C for because. So make sure that you write out everything. Now we're going to talk about passing the multiple choice portion of the AP exam. You all are aware that the multiple choice test is an hour in length. It's about 55 questions in length. And you take this the same way, you think of it as the same way as the SAT exam. It's graded just like the SAT exam. You get a point for every right answer, you lose 1/4 of a point for every wrong answer, and you don't get any credit or penalty for questions you don't answer. Now this is very important to know because you don't have to answer all the questions in order to get a good score on this exam. You may run into a selection that just doesn't make sense. Skip it. You only have 60 minutes to answer 55 questions. But it's not really 60 minutes to answer 55 questions. It's 60 minutes to read 4 or 5 selections and then answer 55 questions. So you have to be very careful about the questions you're going to answer. You don't have to answer the questions in order. Scan the entire test before you begin answering the questions. As I said, you have 60 and 55. Just stick that number in your head. And you want to get as many right answers as possible. So you want to look through each of the selections and you want to choose the selection that you think is the easiest one to answer and answer those questions first. Unlike the SAT, the AP exam does not have levels of difficulty as far as the questions go. On the SAT, you've got the easy questions at the beginning of a selection, you've got the medium questions, and the hard ones are at the end. On the AP exam, the questions follow the text. If they follow the text, there isn't any degree of difficulty in the questions. The last question in the selection may be the easiest question. The first question might be the hardest. It might be vice versa. You don't know. It just follows the text. Those of you who've taken the SAT prep have been told to answer them in order, all right, and answer line numbers, all right. On the AP exam, almost all the questions are line number questions. So don't just ignore that strategy that you learned in your SAT prep class, because it's a waste of time looking for line numbers. And it doesn't mean that they're easier to do, because you have to refer to the text anyway. Remember that the test is a test of both reading comprehension and your knowledge of literary terms. You must have a working knowledge of the literary terms you have been studying all year. Without the knowledge of those terms, you're going to be batting with two strikes. You need to be comfortable with those terms. There are only maybe 20 major terms that you understand, that you know, need to know. You've learned some terms. Just go into the glossary in your textbook and go with your teacher and pick out those terms. Your teachers have been given lists of the important terms that show up on the AP exam over and over again. The ones I mentioned at the beginning, such as diction and syntax and tone and allusion, those words show up all the time. And you need to make sure that you're comfortable with that you can recognize those terms anytime they show up. Some terms will show up with which you are not familiar. Don't let that slow you down. There are hundreds of terms that may show up on the test. Most of them are in the wrong answers. If you're not familiar with the term, don't spend any time on it. Just skip the question and go on to another question. The exam will have from 4 to 6 selections. Answer them by degrees of difficulty. Your degrees of difficulty. You decide which selection you're going to answer first. You decide which questions in that selection you're going to answer first. You take control of the exam. Answer what you consider the easiest selection first. That's very important. Don't forget that the questions contain that the questions that contain an except in them are asking for the wrong answer. In those questions, the wrong answer is the right answer. An example: all of the following except blank are 20th century authors. And then there are 5 authors listed. All right, one of the authors, author D, Nathaniel Hawthorne, is not a 20th century author. Well, that's the wrong answer. But in an except question, that's the right answer. So you need to make sure that you understand how to take that kind of question and go with it. Those are questions that usually are easier to answer than the other questions on the exam. So you might try to find those questions as you're doing your scanning at the beginning of the hour. Remember that you need to be aware of the time throughout the multiple choice exam. Now, if you follow those rules, you'll do well on the exam. The second part of the exam takes 2 hours. For the 2 hours and 15 minutes for the language exam. Last year, a synthesis question was added to the language exam. And the synthesis question is a research question. And in that research question, you're given 5 or 6 sources that you can use in order to write your answer. And you're given an extra 15 minutes to do that question. Now, you're not given an extra 15 minutes to answer the other 2 questions. That 15 minutes is top-loaded at the beginning of the exam. The synthesis question is a research question, something that you will work on or have been working on in your class throughout the year. And your teachers will help you with that. Make sure that you read the prompt carefully and answer it completely. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm going to give you an example of a prompt on last year's exam. This is on the Form B question, which is taken in countries outside the United States. The selections below are taken from a speech delivered in 1861 by Wendell Phillips, a prominent white American abolitionist. The speech, written near the beginning of the Civil War, when Northerners were debating whether to allow African Americans to serve in the military, celebrates the achievements of the Haitian general Toussaint Louverture, a former slave who led the struggle to liberate other enslaved Haitians. Read the selection carefully. That will always be at the beginning of the prompt. Then write an essay in which you analyze the strategies that the speaker uses to praise his subject and move his audience. To praise his subject and move his audience. It's a 2-part question. Most of the questions are 2-part questions. So you have to make sure that you describe how the speaker praises his subject, and you also want to make sure that you tell how the speaker moves his audience. And if you don't do both of those, then you won't get a passing grade on the exam. You need to understand that it's very important as a reader that the student answers both parts of the question. It's very frustrating as a reader when a student does a great job answering one part of the exam, of the prompt, but runs out of time or just doesn't answer the other part, and you can't get a passing grade on that essay. Now, remember that the passing grades from the reader's standpoint, a 9 is the highest grade you can get and a 0 is the lowest grade you can get. You can't get any higher than a 4 if you have an incomplete answer. So you make sure that you answer both parts of the prompt. That's very, very important. I will get back to that. You do not have to answer the other 2 questions in order. You must answer all 3 questions in order to pass the test. This is where your time management skills come into play. You have 2 hours and 15 minutes, and you must answer all 3 questions. If you don't answer all 3, you're going to commit what I call student-side. You're going to kill your chances to pass the exam. So you want to make sure that you answer all 3 questions. You've got to make sure that your time is straight. You can write in the book. Make sure that you mark up the text. Now, one thing about the readers is the readers do not need to have literary terms defined. Remember that the person reading your exam is a high school English teacher or college English professor, and he or she knows about the fertilizer quotient. Now, what I mean by the fertilizer quotient is that all of us, and I emphasize us, have been given assignments where, let's say, we had to write a 350-word essay. And by the time we got to 250 words, we took a deep breath and we tried to figure out how are we going to do the other 100 words, because I've run out of ideas. All right? And that's what I call the fertilizer quotient. Please don't do this on the AP exam. The teachers who are reading this exam are expert readers who are very conscientious about their jobs and want you to succeed. One of the things that we get as readers when we are preparing to be readers is a rubric, and on that rubric it says, reward the students for what they do well. And that's what we look for, is what the students do well. But please don't use any fertilizer. Remember that how you approach the writing of your essay is your own business. And I'll explain what I mean about 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon in a little bit. A killer opening is always the way to go, but you must be able to follow it up. What do I mean by a killer opening? It is very important that you let this one teacher who is reading your exam understand that you know what the prompt is asking for and that you know what you know. And you're trying to convince that reader that you know. Now that might be a little bit confusing, but it's important that you let them know that you know what you're talking about. And that opening is so important. The first paragraph or the first 2 paragraphs of your essay are the ones that grab that reader and let that reader know that you know. So make sure that you introduce that reader to your knowledge right away. That is so important on this exam. Do not just rewrite the prompt. The reader knows the prompt. The reader has memorized the prompt. It's a waste of time for you to just rewrite the prompt before you get into your paper. Essays which sustain their openings are the ones which receive 7s, 8s, and 9s. Make sure that you give yourself time to read what you have written. Now that might sound simple, but we all know, teachers and students alike, you've been sitting in a class and the teacher's written something up on the board and there's a misspelling or there's a word left out or something like that. We do it all the time. So you have to give yourself time to become an editor of your own work. This is your introduction and your entire relationship with this reader, all boxed up in this little essay. And you want to make sure that you are complete and that you have made the corrections that you have seen. It's not a problem if the paper is a bit messy because you've noticed that something is misspelled and you've drawn a line through it, or you put a word or a caret or whatever you've done to edit your own paper. Remember that this is a first draft and that the paper is graded holistically. Now, also remember that the person grading your paper is an English teacher. When I do workshops for teachers, I often talk about the fact that no other teachers like to be around English teachers and faculty meetings because we're constantly editing speech and papers. So you've got to make sure that your paper is as perfect as it can be for a rough draft. So give yourself a little bit of time to read what you have written, not what you think you've written, but what you have written. Spelling, grammar, and punctuation are all important. Don't forget, they're English teachers. They're picky English teachers. So make sure that you have it as clean as possible. The open question on the AP exam is a question where you're giving your opinion. You're writing a persuasive essay with the knowledge that you have from what you've read, what you've experienced, and all of these other things. Make sure that you have a theme before you begin the open question so that you don't go all over the place as you are composing your answer. This question is sometimes too easy looking. What do I mean by that? It might just, there have been questions that just, where you were just talking about something from your past. All right? Now, you're not going to be graded necessarily on how good or how bad your past was. You're going to be graded on how well you write about your past. This is a writing that is graded. So you need to make sure that your writing is exceptional. I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the question, the prompt that I talked about earlier on the question number 2. The prompt said, read the selection carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the strategies that the speaker uses to praise his subject and to move his audience. And it's a speech. I'm just going to read a couple. You will have this in front of you. Line 15 says, Toussaint forged the thunderbolt and hurled it at what? At the proudest blood in Europe, the Spaniard, and sent him home conquered. And in brackets, there are cheers. Now let's look at the question. Analyze the strategies that the speaker uses to praise his subject and move his audience. So that sentence is a perfect example of both. He's praising Louverture for defeating the Spaniards, and he's also moving his audience because they're cheering. All right? That's something that you'd want to mention. You want to look for the things that help you understand the prompt. It's very important. Now, I told you earlier about the exam maker, right? You've got to defeat the exam maker when you're taking the exam. This exam is not like an exam you have in your class where you've reviewed all the information. The teacher's probably given you all the answers in the review so that all you have to do is study. And when you take the exam, you're just giving the information back to the teacher. You're giving the information back on this exam also. But you also have to understand that the information that you're getting to write about is brand new information. You don't know what is going to be on the exam. Every now and then you might run into a selection that you've studied in class. Praise to God when that happens, but it doesn't happen too often. So I want you to think about this person that's reading your paper. Before the readers even begin to grade the papers, they spend an entire day going over rubrics and sample essays and practicing so that they can become accomplished readers of the essay. So that they're not just reading your essay cold. The reader spends 6 days reading exams. The average reader might read 150 essays a day. The same question for the entire week. So that you need to make sure that your exam, your essay answer is fresh. You need to also understand that most of the time there will be only one person reading your paper. Now, it may be read by one other person, but usually it's only read by one person. So it's a one-shot deal. Your essay, you want that person to be impressed by your essay. That person will be reading hundreds of papers on the same question. You want your answer to be unique. And you can do that. Your answer becomes unique because of your writing skills. Most of the answers are going to be similar, but your writing skills are what will help you get a higher score. The killer opening. This person is reading your essay. They started reading on Sunday. It's now Thursday. They read from 8 o'clock to 4:30 every day. It's 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. And they get your paper. That's why that killer opening is so important. Their eyes light up. It's a great opening. And they're back in business. And it's all because of your paper. So you want to make sure that in that opening of your paper, you let them know that you know. You let them know you got it. You understand the prompt. You're giving an example right away. And you're ready to roll. A 5-paragraph essay. A 5-paragraph essay. When you were in the 4th grade, you started writing 5-paragraph essays. You understand about that introduction, you understand about the body, and you understand about the conclusion. And there's nothing wrong with a 5-paragraph essay on this AP exam, which is the most sophisticated exam you'll ever take. If you want to write a different kind of essay, that's fine. But a 5-paragraph essay is a perfect skeletal system for your essay. And that killer opening is right there in the introduction. I advise my students to do that. Now, it doesn't have to be 5 paragraphs. It could be 7 paragraphs, right? But the skeletal system of a 5-paragraph, the concept of a 5-paragraph essay, that introduction, the body, and the conclusion will never make you go wrong. I want to reemphasize 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. It's something you need to think about. All right? What am I going to do to make my essay make the teacher's eyes perk up at 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon? That's the essay you want to write. You want to write the essay that's going to get that teacher's blood flowing again. This next is very important. You want to show off your writing skills, but remember that this is not a creative writing exercise. I've had students in my class who were extremely creative writers, poets, essayists, short story writers, playwrights, who are just super writers, but really struggled in trying to write an AP essay because they were all over the place. You don't want this essay to go all over the place. You want to use sophisticated language, but you want to make sure that you answer the prompt. Now remember, I told you at the beginning about repeating the prompt. Please do not repeat the prompt in your introduction. It's a waste of time. It doesn't show any creativity to the reader. And some readers are thrown off by students who repeat the prompt. And last, but far from least, is that you let the reader know that you know. This is so important on this exam. You want to let the reader know that you know. Now, if you use all these skills wisely, then you'll be successful on this exam. And your teacher will feel good about that, and you'll feel even better. Thank you very much.